most questions that people have about anxiety is, what is anxiety? The most basic, straightforward kind of umbrella answer is kind of adapting and trying to manage a fear that you cannot control, right? So something pops up where you're afraid of it, you've never seen it before, or you've encountered it before but you're not used to it, will trigger these emotions or feelings of discomfort, fear. That essentially right there is anxiety. When we think of an exposure, or when we're exposing ourselves to something, what are we doing? We're actually just being in the moment and dealing with whatever's happening in the moment. So if you're exposing yourself to the dark, you're spending time in the dark. If you're exposing yourself to the light, you're spending time in the light. If you're exposing yourself to this living room or this space, we're hanging out in this space. Anything that induces some sort of anxiety, an exposure coach comes in and guides you through the exposure and going step by step. The goal is to win small battles, right? If you go from A to Z, you're gonna fail every time. If you choose to go from A to B, you're gonna have more success. And then we go to C, D, E, F, and before you know it, we're at Z. The coach comes in to limit and pace how much distress are we gonna take on while we're doing this. The coach is there to say, all right, we know we wanna get from point A to point Z, but there are all these points in between. Now, we want to get to the goal. The goal is, I wanna be better, I want to not be afraid of this thing or that thing. But ultimately, you can't just wake up and say, I'm gonna get there. You need to take these steps. A coach comes in and says, let's break it down. What is the ultimate goal and what are the smaller things we can use to get there? From research, the most effective and straightforward type of approach for dealing with anxiety or OCD is what we call ERP, which is exposure response prevention treatment. We slowly start to figure out, let's expose nice and slow, but we're not gonna go right to Z. We're gonna break it down. Now, it's really as simple as exposing you to the trigger in a slow manner, repeatedly, over the course of some time, until you start to habituate to those feelings. Well, habituation is part of the ERP model, and if you look at the first 5 letters of that word, it's habit. So you're creating a habit out of the thing that's scary, but it doesn't happen overnight. The core fear is big because we're gonna create this hierarchy based on this core fear. Now, the core fear is like the backbone to all of this. This is the ultimate goal. This is what I'm afraid of, but it's not just germs, it's what the germs are gonna do. The core fear could be death, but I'm afraid of germs. I'm afraid of walking by people because of germs. I'm afraid of touching things because of germs. I'm afraid of people sneezing because of germs. And so we ask, is it the germs? Upon further inspection, we find out it's actually not the germs, it's death. And when we know it's death, that's when we get used to the germs. What happens is anxiety gets tricky and says, we got germs, we're okay with that. If you walk down these stairs, I'm gonna make you nervous about that. Anxiety will change. It's always gonna find a way to keep an upper hand on you and manage you. The role of an exposure coach or doing ERP is to find a way to manage the anxiety. How does one know when they need clinical anxiety treatment? That's up to a professional to determine, but if it's really impairing your life and it's really managing exactly what you're doing at all times of the day and it's preoccupying your thoughts and you're not able to function, you might want to speak to a professional. A professional can do what they need to do to put you in a position, whether you're going to do some outpatient care or if you're going to do some coaching things where you're going to have someone come in and help guide you. Most times we work in conjunction with a psychiatrist or a professional and we help execute the goals that they have set aside for their client and they have discussed with their client. And then there are independent clients that just want some insight. They just want to learn, what could I do in this situation? What do I do? This is what I do. What could I do? What do I do? How should I do it? How much should I break this down? How far do I go? You need a coach to kind of pull you in and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Remember the hierarchy. Remember the pacing. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to pull your hair out. Your whole life is an exposure. Sorry, I said it. Your whole life is an exposure. You can't anticipate what's going to happen when you get in your car and drive down the street and go to the store. Does that mean everyone has a clinical diagnosis of anxiety and it manages them? No. But it does mean that it can impair them and it does bother them, right? We don't know to what extent. We don't know what this little trigger may start. There might be a snowball effect, and before you know it, something that you used to do on the daily has become something difficult. If you're dealing with a parent, a friend, or a sibling that doesn't quite understand what you're going through, and even though you're explaining it to them and you're trying, they may or may not ever understand it. A coach may come in, you may not tell this coach much about your triggers or symptoms, and this coach may already know 1000% more about you and how to deal with you than your family that has lived with you for the last 16 years.